Welcome back to Hello Nigeria. Now, according to the World Health Organization, 1 in at least 3 women would experience some form of abuse at some point in their life. Now, today we're looking at abuse, how far it's gone, what can we do, how terrible, what are the impacts of abuse and the various types. When we talk about abuse, people think it's just sexual abuse, but there's more to life, there's more to abuse than it being sexual. Someone has decided to tell the story of abuse through her book, which she recently wrote, Disowned, a book about all sorts of harmful traditional practices that we need to shed more light on in Nigeria. Her name is Nina Ifechukwu Aniyanuka, and she's our guest on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're excited to have you too as well. Now, I'm really glad that you wrote your book, Disowned. Congratulations first on that.
Yes, congrats.
You wrote about abuse. Abuse is something that people don't talk about as much. Thankfully, we're starting to see a lot of people coming out to talk about it, but there's this hush attitude when it comes to abuse. People don't want to share, people don't want to talk about it because they're afraid of stigma. Why did you decide to focus on that? You could have talked about anything else, but you decided it had to be abuse.
Yeah, I could have talked about hair and jewelry.
Or weddings.
Or weddings.
You know, everybody's getting married every Saturday.
And all the mundane, unimportant things. Yes, I could have talked about anything, but I wanted to talk about something quite important. Let me just say that when I started my journey to Disowned, I didn't want to write a story that was so weighty about abuse and all that. But the stories came, and because I'm quite curious, I'm very argumentative, by the way, and I'd like to say that when I argue, I like to argue from a position of strength and knowledge. So I wanted to tell my story. I wanted my narrative to come from a place of knowledge. I went out and I talked to people. Abuse is real. It's scary. It's actually quite gruesome and damaging. I just got tired of the voice of silence being louder than the voice of reasoning, because there's this systematic silence where nobody talks about it. And you know what happens? You're not protecting the victims. I call them the victors. You're not protecting them. You are actually protecting the abusers. Because the moment I'm abused and I don't talk about it, then my abuser has the strength to abuse someone else. I met girls who told me stories that scared me, and I wanted other people to hear that story. I wanted the story of these bad men and women to go out there.
I like that you mentioned bad men
and
women.
Oh, women are abusers, trust me. Exactly. I know that when you read Disowned, you have read Disowned, one of the darkest stories is Blackie's Mission. This girl, Blackie, who we don't get to know her name, Blackie, actually. Blackie was introduced into prostitution by her own mother from when she was as young as 8 years old. And I was speaking to real-life little girls who told me stories about how their mothers, their aunties, their elder sisters gave them to men for money, for 300 naira a day.
That is awful. Now, fueling this conversation when it comes to abuse has obviously had a personal impact on you as well. How would you say you've changed as a person, speaking to so many people that have been in awful situations to do with abuse? How has that affected you?
Okay, it's made me actually more aware. It's made me more observant. Now I look at everything. When I see a man or a woman with a child, I don't care the sex of the child, boy or girl. I look, I observe. If I see something, I say something. I don't care how the parents feel. If I see your driver touch your little girl or little boy in a way I find suspicious, I'm going to speak up. I speak up anyway. It has made me look after my babies, my nieces, and my nephew better. You know, I look out for them. I talk to them more. When I have kids around me and I have the power or the control to influence them, I let them know that your body is your own. Nobody's allowed to touch it.
Oh, yes.
And I think everybody needs to have that awareness and begin to live that way so that the abusers, if the little kids are told to scream, if every little boy and girl begins to scream, the abusers will pull back. So I've become more aware, I've become more observant, and I've started speaking up more.
All right, now let's talk about the various forms of abuse. At the beginning of the show, I had spoken about how abuse isn't just sexual, like there are different forms of abuse. Via your book, did you explore other forms of abuse? And if there are, what are these forms?
Absolutely, there are emotional verbal, they're mental, they're psychological, they're financial. You know, a lot of men say to their women, oh, I don't want you to work. I need you to be the home keeper. It's textbook abusive because he's not putting them on an allowance. He doesn't want her to be financially empowered, so she doesn't walk away. There are people who abuse you emotionally. I know women who have told me stories about how their husbands do not touch them because they are angry at them. It's an emotional abuse. They break you down, they say things to you, they talk to you, they talk you down, demean you, treat you like you're nothing. Women do the same. Somebody sent me a very disgusting video that's making round on the internet right now. I don't know if any of you has seen it. It's about a man somewhere in Africa, a woman who is beating up a man on the floor, trying to take something from his pocket. That is abuse. So it's a two-way traffic. There are all kinds of abuse. Physical, you emasculate your man, you dehumanize your woman. There are all kinds of abuse. So just don't wait to be hit first. Look for the traits. He's cutting you off. He's not letting you make your money. He tells you to sell everything you have and stop your business. Sister, brother, you need to think.
Honestly, now silence is also violence, and unfortunately not enough people understand that message. So through your book, you actually managed to depict that. However, that's just step one. Step two is now continuing that movement and going forward to ensure that we're actually reducing the prevalence of systemic abuse in society. So what are you doing to continue that and to make sure that you continue to advocate for against domestic abuse?
Okay. What I've decided to do and what I've started doing is to attach myself to NGOs and bodies, organizations who work with women, children, and vulnerable people, male or female, who have suffered, are suffering, or are susceptible to suffering any form of violence, especially sexual. So what I do now is try to be an advocate, speak up, and ensure that something happens, because we need to stop these hashtags of pray for A, pray for B, fight for A, fight for B. Somebody is arrested, nobody does anything about it anymore. We need to follow through. Call the police, find out who is handling it. Oh, the case has been moved from this little police station to the first headquarters. I call. I follow up. Ah, madam, they relate to you. Oh, no, they are not related to me, but then they're my brothers and they're my sisters. I need to know what's going on. That's what I have started doing.
Amazing.
That's what I would keep doing, and I want other people to start doing that. This madness needs to stop.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for being so passionate about this cause. I mean, in your book, you have about 5 different stories, and all of them are different forms of abuse. So give us an insight into some of the things, each story, and what the abuse was about.
Okay, so there are 5 stories. Black is Mission, Daddy's Little Girl, Disowned, Two of a Kind, and oh my goodness, I can't remember the title of one of my stories, but that's fine. Okay, so Nena's Loss.
Yes.
Nena's Loss is the first story. It's a happier story. It's about a man who cheats on his wife. Okay, that's mean. How do I say that's happier?
But it's a lighter story.
Yes, it's a lighter story. It's not as dark and
Yeah,
heavy.
I understand why I say it's a happier story, because the other ones are actually darker and deeper. They're the kind of stories that you read and you have your toes curling up in disgust at the amount and the weight of abuse that actually happens. And I know when people read some of the stories and the intensity, they're thinking, oh, it's just fiction, you know, it's nothing real. But you've had encounters with people. So you're talking about Nena's abuse. Don't go into all the details.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So that's just it. It's a woman who finds out her late husband cheated and it just changed everything for her. Then Black's Mission is horrible. I don't even want to talk about it. Like, I'm cringing. It's the story of a girl who went through hell and high waters and stayed in hell. You know, there was no redemption. Then Disowned, a woman who marries a very wealthy, loving man, but behind closed doors, he's an animal. Then there's Two of a Kind, one of my favorite, actually, about the woman who, I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag.
All right, then how long did it take you to write this whole stories, though?
5 years, but to publishing, 9.
Wow.
It was a 9-year journey. Because when I was writing, I never had the writer's block. By the way, you know, where you're writing and you have a block, you can't really write. I wrote, but I was scared. So there were times I stopped writing for months because I was scared. There were times I wrote in the dark and I'd feel the voices, and You know, and
It affected
it's
you.
scary. Yeah, it still does. You know, it's the stories. It still does. It's too dark.
Now, how do we make sure that we're sending the right messages when it comes to standing against abuse? A lot of people get abuse very misconstrued. A lot of people also don't understand how deep the rape culture is and how endemic it is in our society. How do we actually get people to enhance their education when it comes to abuse?
Start early. Do not wait for your child to be 10 or 12. Start early. If he can talk, if he can walk, if he can say daddy and mommy, she needs to know. Start early. Stop judging the victims. It is not their fault. When a child, a woman, a girl, a boy, a man has been abused, do not mock the abuse. Do not tell them it's because they were weak or they were loose.
Yeah.
The narrative needs to change. It needs to change.
We find that we're in a society where we often shame the victors. So we find that somebody comes on Instagram or on social media to cry for help that they've been abused. But what we see is in the comment section, you see people saying things like, did you not enjoy it? What did you wear to his house? Did you not wear a shirt dress? So we need to change the narrative. We need to stop all of that. We need to keep pushing the message out there. Now, beyond being an author, we also know you're an actor, and you recently, congratulations on your movie, your series, Mr. X show that premiered on the 6th of May. Are you at some point looking to telling stories in this regard as well? Because we know you're also a writer, you're an actor. Do you look forward to, are we expecting to see maybe a movie or a series?
Absolutely. People have started indicating interest in the book. People want to get rights to make movies. Oh, I actually got a message on Instagram about a girl. She's a student who wants to make one of my stories into a short for her project. She's in Canada. I thought that was very endearing, and I'm trying to convince my publishers to just let her do it free of charge, you know. So yes, but there's a particular story in that book that I'm not giving to anybody. I need to tell that story in pictures. I want to make the movie. So yes, I want to tell stories. My next TV series is going to be on abuse, so that we begin to explore the things that happen and people can see them.
That is amazing. That is honestly amazing. Now, moving on and moving forward, abuse is, as we've said many times, it's too prevalent in our society, and it continues and continues and continues. Now, a lot of people don't speak up, like we said. How do we start also encouraging people and making people feel safe enough to come forward and say, this is where I've been, this is what I've been through, and I need and deserve justice?
When the society judges less, I encountered what Olive just talked about several weeks ago. A young girl comes on Instagram or on Twitter, and she said she had been raped by a particular person. And people were saying to her, what did you wear there? What did you go to do there? Why did you spend the night there? We can ask all the questions, but the moment we become less judgmental, people will tend to open up more. And having said all that, please let me say this because it's very important to me. It's also important to not listen to just the victim. Listen to the accused as well, because people have taken advantage and they have accused people falsely. So let's not blur the lines. However, when somebody comes out, give them the benefit of the doubt. When we judge people less, then they speak out more.
Great. No better way to wrap up the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. The beautiful thing, thank you so much for gifting us copies of your books. And she's also going to be giving 2 people free copies. So follow Leila and I on Instagram at LJS Online and at Olive Emodi. We'll be doing a giveaway of the book on our Instagram. And you can follow her on Instagram at Ninaku22. Thank you so much for starting up this conversation. We will keep talking about it. We'll keep spreading the word out there. Abuse needs to come to an end. And we wish you all the best with your book this autumn.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go on a very quick break. When we come back from the break, we're going to be looking at, we've talked about abuse. We're going to be looking at the way out. One of the reasons people still stay in abusive relationships is because they are financially dependent on their partners. Now, our next guest is a woman who has found a creative way to help people who are trapped in abusive relationships or who have come out of some sort of abuse.
To enjoy more of these our Ogbonge videos when you just watch, press this button to subscribe on top of our YouTube page. You go love her.